Do you have manual motophobia? Well, help is here.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Hi, and welcome to DIY Film with Merle Becker, the channel where I help you make better videos. Stick around to the end of the video where I will offer a filmmaking tip that will be the best advice you'll get all day. Except for maybe what your mother has to say, because she's got the best advice. So you've got your camera and you've been cruising along okay with the automatic settings, but now you're thinking you'd like a bit more control over your images. For example, you're shooting a waterfall and you're trying to get each water droplet crisp and clear, and for some reason they're blurry. Why, oh why can't you control this? And how the heck do photographers get their subjects to be in crisp focus and their backgrounds to be so nice and blurry? Why won't my auto settings do that for me? Professionals live in manual mode, or sometimes they'll choose shutter priority or aperture priority in order to achieve a certain look. But that's the point. They make those choices. They don't let the camera make the choices for them. And understanding these three things will help you make those choices as well. So let me start out by saying the principles that we're about to discuss apply to both video and still photography. So you may see some examples that are still photographs, but the same applies to video. ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Understanding ISO, aperture, and shutter speed involves a basic understanding of how cameras work, so let's do it. Once upon a time, not so long ago, cameras were totally manual. You would put the film in your camera. This film was coated with light-sensitive crystals that would change when the light hit the film. You would then press the button and the lens on the camera would open up a little and some light would get in there and expose the film. You would then get the film developed and print your photos from your negative. Fast forward to today, where most cameras are digital. The cameras are different, but the concepts are the same. So let's start out with ISO, or ISO. ISO refers to how sensitive your film, or camera in the case of digital, is to light. Back in the day, photographers would choose the film that was best suited for the lighting conditions at the location where they would be shooting. The film came in a little canister, and on the side of that canister there was a little number with ISO written before it. If the ISO was high, it was really sensitive to light. You could shoot in a darker room and it would produce an image even if there wasn't a lot of light available to expose the negative. And if the ISO was low, it meant that it wasn't as sensitive to light. A low ISO meant it was great for a bright sunny day where there was plenty of light available to expose the negative. High number, really sensitive. Low number, not as sensitive. So photographers would be like, great, I can shoot in the near dark and still make a photo print, right? Well, not quite. There is a trade-off. Shooting with a high ISO makes for a grainy image, but more about that in a minute. So fast forward to digital cameras. ISO still means the same thing. If you use a high ISO setting on your camera, you're going to be able to shoot in darker situations, but the image will be grainy. Low number, you'll get a crisper image, but you'll need more light. Okay, so that's ISO. Just remember high number, sensitive, low number, less sensitive.
Let's take a look at the second thing you'll need to understand to tackle your manual settings. Aperture. Aperture is how wide the lens opens to let in the light to expose the film. When I think of aperture, I like to think of the iris in your eye. When it's really bright out, your iris closes up so tons of light doesn't get in and damage your eye. And when it's dark out, your iris opens wide to let lots of light in so you can see what the heck is in front of you.
So the aperture or opening of your camera lens is kind of like an iris. And how big this opening is measured by something called f-stop. High f-stop, small opening. Low f-stop, big opening. I know it sounds like it should be opposite, but that's just how it is. All right, let's do a quick review. ISO is how sensitive the camera is to light. High ISO, sensitive. Low ISO, not as sensitive. And aperture is how wide the lens opens to let in the light. High f-stop, small opening. Low f-stop, big opening. Okay, so there's one thing left, shutter speed.
Shutter speed is exactly what it sounds like. It's how long the shutter stays open. If it's open a long time, a lot of light gets in. If it's open a short time, a little light gets in.
Shutter speed is measured in seconds. A shutter speed of 1/8 is 1/8 of a second, and 1/250 is 1/250th of a second. That's really all you need to remember.
The shutter speed is how long the shutter stays open, and it's measured in seconds.
Okay, so let's talk about how ISO, aperture, and shutter speed affect your image. Understanding this will help you make choices in manual mode.
First, ISO. As mentioned, when you boost your ISO, the image gets grainy. So if you want a nice crisp image, or if you're going to blow your image up, keep your ISO low. Second, aperture. When you boost the f-stop number, remember that means the lens opening becomes smaller, you increase your depth of field. That means there's a larger range for what's in focus. So say you're doing a portrait and you want a blurry background, but you want your subject in focus. You would choose a low f-stop so your subject stays in focus and whatever is behind them is out of focus. High f-stop, everything's in focus. Low f-stop, a small range is in focus.
And lastly, shutter speed. When your shutter is open for a long time, there's a lot of time for the camera to register the image. So if it moves a little bit, you'll see some blur. So if you want some motion blur, use a slow shutter speed. And if you want everything to freeze as is, use a quick shutter speed. So when you're shooting stills or video, you make your decisions based on these three things. So for example, I have a mid to low ISO because I'm using artificial light and I'm not really interested in getting a grainy image. Secondly, I would like a blurry background, so I'm using a low f-stop. And lastly, I'm using a quick shutter speed because I don't want any motion blur.
All right, here's a final review because repetition makes it stick. ISO is how sensitive the camera is to light. High ISO, sensitive. Low ISO, not as sensitive. Aperture is how wide the lens opens to let in the light. High f-stop, small opening. Low f-stop, large opening. And shutter speed is how long the shutter is open, and it's measured in seconds.
All right, so hopefully you won't be intimidated by your manual settings anymore. Play around with these settings, prioritizing each one, seeing what they do. After all, if you mess up, you won't be wasting film canisters. All right, let's do the tip. So now that you know what ISO, aperture, and shutter speed do, leave your info screen on while you're shooting so you get used to seeing what settings you're on. It's so easy to keep this info off so you can pay attention to your framing, but while you're learning your settings, get in the habit of noticing what your numbers are. This will help you remember your choices for the future and drill in your head how everything works together. And as it becomes second nature, you can take away the info screen, but for now, use it while you're practicing. All right, so next time I see you, I expect you to be on M, okay? If you found any of this helpful, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe down below so you know when the next one is out, and I will catch you next time.